Welcome back to everyone who out there in the virtual world and with us physically here at the Shepherd Center. I have the pleasure today of talking about the invisible triad, so how fatigue, mood, and cognition impact each other. And we're going to cover a number of things, including how frequently do these symptoms occur for people with MS, understanding how they relate to each other, impact each other, and how the symptoms impact your daily activities and particularly relationships. And also help you become familiar with some tools and strategies to manage these common symptoms. Invisible symptoms I think of as the real catch-22 in MS. So you may look and actually feel what people think of as normal, and that can be a plus or it can be a minus for you. What happens is that people don't feel like you really fit their definition of sick or our culture's definition of sick. And as a result, they may not know how to interact with you, how to treat you. And also, invisible symptoms tend to be really difficult to describe. It's hard to come up with the right words for yourself so that it really reflects how you feel, but also to help the other people understand. So as a result, people are more apt to underestimate and minimize your symptoms. And I don't think that their intent is always negative, but sometimes that's how other people manage their fear. And they want you to have as high quality a life as possible. It does mean, because the symptoms are invisible, that disclosure may feel like more of a choice because other people don't know that you have a condition like MS. But in spite of them being invisible, they certainly can impact pretty much everything in your life. So here's a polling question for you. Which of these invisible symptoms occurs more frequently for people with MS? So just by a show of hands, who thinks the most frequently experienced invisible symptom is cognitive changes? A couple of people. How about depression? A few more people. And how about fatigue? Boy, this is a smart audience. Okay. So it in fact is fatigue. Fatigue is experienced by 80% of people with MS. So this diagram may look confusing with all these arrows, but it's really here for a purpose. And you are in the middle as a person with MS because you have a central role to play in MS. And all of these arrows show that the symptoms, the three invisible symptoms, interact and impact each other, but you also have an impact on the symptoms. So that's important. And I guess as Tracy was talking today, I'm thinking of you, people with MS, as the human motherboard, okay, for MS, because what you do clearly makes a difference. So we're going to start by talking about fatigue. And here's an example of how these symptoms can interact. So a person who is very fatigued may be more moody, impatient, and experience difficulty concentrating. So you could do this diagram and put the arrows in yourself. So what do we know about fatigue? As I said, 80% of people with MS experience fatigue. And it can affect most if not all of what you do in your life. Fatigue often becomes a primary focus in relationships. People talk about it. It affects what you can do with people in your life and how you spend your time together. But the bottom line is there is much you can do to reduce fatigue and its impact. So there are really kind of two kinds of fatigue for people with MS. One is primary fatigue that we refer to as lassitude, just that absolute mental and or physical weariness that people experience. This is a direct result of the MS disease process itself, that demyelination that occurs in the central nervous system. So this is not because people don't have good habits. This is part of the MS. And so it becomes the primary physical symptom. There's also secondary fatigue, and this is critically important. This diagram shows you that there are many factors that contribute to secondary fatigue. And if you look at several of them, immediately one of the things you could conclude is that you can do something about these things. You might not, have any control over whether you catch a cold, But you certainly can manage your stress more effectively. You can get better sleep. You can get physical exercise. And if you're depressed, you can get treatment. So that's the good news. So here's another polling question. Which of the following best describes your fatigue? And you can choose more than one of these. And if you're a support person, you might want to vote on this as well, or vote on your own fatigue. How many, show of hands, would say that they would describe their fatigue as I crash and hit the wall? Okay, good number. I have an overwhelming need to sleep. Okay, probably a few more people. Getting ready for work is work. Okay. And how about the last one? Even small things feel heavy. Okay. Well, it's kind of evenly distributed across the four there. Okay, before we talk about what you can do about fatigue, I want to talk just briefly about how to lose the battle with fatigue. And as a psychologist, I've seen this many times over the years. You can act like you don't have it. You can try to ignore it. But believe me, it will not be ignored. Okay? You can do as much as you can right now, just in case next year or in 5 years, you can't do as much. This has real consequences for you with the people who care about you in your life. If you're spending all your time working, you're not really enjoying the rest of your life. You can focus on the benefits of overdoing and ignore the costs. Again, you might not get away with that. You can consistently put yourself last. This is very common. You can persist in doing things like you've always done them. And I think of this as behavioral spasticity, where you are inflexible. You can equate asking for help with weakness and making changes with giving in, and it is neither. So what can you do? Budgeting and banking and budgeting. So you want to learn how to save and then spend your energy wisely. And this would be true if you got a paycheck. If you spend all your money on the weekend and you're not going to get through the rest of the week or the next couple of weeks, that's probably not going to work for you. So once you've sort of made up your mind to save energy, you want to consider how you're going to spend it. And we recommend that you think about the 4 Ps. And we're going to talk about each of these just briefly. So planning. It helps to create a schedule that includes some rest breaks, and you can vary this. You don't have to do it the same every day. But that issue of balance, you will hear the word balance many times in all talks about MS. So heavy activities with light activities in the course of a day and the course of a week. You might also periodically want to make some notes about your fatigue and events going on, activities, and then get a sense of, are there patterns to this, or come up with a rating system. Sometimes I've had people use different color Post-its to rate their fatigue for the day, but that's a planning example. Prioritization. You want to plan your day to have a mixture of things that you want to do and things that you need to do. So asking yourself that question, is it really necessary? And maybe it is necessary, but it could be spread out over a couple of days. And you want to think of having priorities in different categories. Some things are high, medium, low. So this helps you create flexibility. So just like we want you to have muscular flexibility and extremity flexibility, we want you to have flexibility in your day, and so that you can actually enjoy what you're doing. Pacing. Simplifying, not trying to multitask. We've all pretty much concluded it doesn't work. So making little adjustments at the end of the day will have an impact on your fatigue. Particularly breaking large tasks into smaller pieces. Even if you have a task that you can do half of it today and the other half tomorrow, that works really well. And so ultimately, you're still going to accomplish what you want to accomplish, but in smaller bits. And positioning. You may not really think about this one as it impacts fatigue, but just how you organize your workspaces, be that your computer area, your kitchen, your bathroom, your car, where you store things, so that you don't have to reach, so that you don't have to get up and go up the stairs every time you need something. And also, anytime you can sit to do something, we really encourage you to do that. So that's all about energy conservation. So what you can do, you can bank and budget your energy. You can implement these 4 Ps. And also, I would encourage you to practice asking for and accepting assistance. You need to be specific when you ask for assistance so that people know what you really need. They cannot read your mind, and they will have a much better sense of really having helped you if they do for you what you need. And also remember that something done differently is still better than not done. So again, that flexibility. It also lets the other people in your life in on what MS is really specifically, concretely like for you. And here are some additional resources. I think some of these are brochures, or certainly we've got a paper there on sleep, which is essential for everybody and we know is conducive to better health for all people. And so a lot of these things also would factor in for people who are supporting somebody with MS. And a presentation that last is by some occupational therapists that are consultants to CAN-DO. And please check our website and that of the National MS Society for all kinds of additional resources on fatigue. So same diagram, but now what you'll see is that mood has been highlighted. So we're going to talk a bit about that. So a person who is depressed or anxious may not think as clearly, process information as well, or make sound decisions. So you can see how mood and cognition are related to each other. So what do we know about mood changes? Obviously, every single person in this room and out there in the virtual world has a mood, and sometimes more than one. And certainly this is true of people with MS and support partners. And if you think about people who are depressed, anxious, moody, they often have more difficulty taking care of themselves and other people. And this is true of support partners. They may lose time from work because they're so fatigued. And generally people with mood issues are just more irritable, okay? So they're more difficult to live with, okay? So really addressing mood issues is essential. And also keep in mind that for people with MS, mood can be affected by medications, particularly steroids, and that can take you in 2 extremes of mood changes. So both more elated, but also can result in some depression for people. So what do we know about depression in MS? More than 50% of people will experience an episode of major depression, at least one episode. And depression is also more common in support partners. So both people need to be thinking about this. And in MS, depression has multiple causes. It is part of the neurologic disease process, part of what happens to the immune system, and certainly having psychosocial changes in your life, work, family, relationships, all kinds of things can contribute to this. Depression, we know, is underdiagnosed and undertreated in MS. People tend not to bring up their mood or talk about it when they go in to see their providers. Often they're not asked about it, and as a result, it is undertreated. So this is the first, we're trying to open the door here for you. We're talking about mood and depression. Also, depression is apt to be affecting your relationships and your work life. When people are depressed, it's hard to do your job. It's hard to want to be around people. So what more do we know about depression? Some symptoms of depression overlap with symptoms of MS. We're going to take a look at that in a moment. And depression makes other symptoms worse. So people who are depressed tend to really feel that mentally, cognitively, they're not functioning as well. They may experience their pain to a more severe degree. And also, they're more fatigued. Also, depression can be life-threatening. This is real. So you might wonder, of all the possible moods, why are we talking so much about depression? We know a lot about depression in MS, so we're sharing that knowledge with you. So this is a really important one to pay attention to. So what are the symptoms of depression? This is a long list. There's certainly a mood component, but one of the things that's actually kind of interesting is that depression in MS often presents more as irritability than it does sadness. So that's useful to know. But if you look here, the symptoms that are highlighted are ones that overlap with MS. So sometimes when people say, oh, I'm so tired, I don't want to do anything, I don't want to go out with my friends, sometimes people overinterpret that as depression, and other times it's not picked up on as depression. So, and problems with thinking and concentration. So this is part of the reason that sometimes it's difficult to sort out, is this depression, is this fatigue, is this cognitive difficulty? And there are assessments for that. Talking about it can be very helpful. But certainly some of these symptoms, particularly persistent thoughts of death or suicide, are of great concern to us. So the treatment of depression. Regardless of the cause, depression in people with MS and partners responds well to treatment. And the treatment recommendations, psychotherapy and antidepressant medication is the treatment of choice for depression. Exercise is also helpful. So one of the things that we obviously want people to do is take advantage of support groups, if that is something that they feel would be helpful to them, but that is not a substitute for treating significant depression. It could be an adjunct to the treatment. And also self-medicating with substances is not a substitute. Now, substances doesn't mean prescription medication, but it could be alcohol, it could be gambling, it could be spending time with unhealthy people, that sort of thing. So that is not necessarily the answer. So what you can do about depression, you want to really report significant mood changes to your healthcare professional. And you don't have to try to diagnose yourself. You don't have to necessarily feel like you're ready to label it as depression. But if you just say to someone, I'm concerned about my mood, the other thing is that support partners, if you notice changes in mood in the loved one with MS, it's really important to be upfront with them and say, I've really noticed something about your mood seems to be different, or you seem to be struggling, or when we talk, you seem just so irritable. So bring it to their attention. And so you can use whatever words you want when you go in to see your provider, but don't ignore it, because as we've said, this is affecting other symptoms and certainly the quality of your relationships and your life in general. You can ask your doctor, your provider, or you can call the National MS Society for referrals. We have a navigator right here with us, Christina. But generally, psychiatrists, who are physicians who specialize in the diagnosis and treatment of emotional problems, and nurse practitioners who can specialize in mental health issues, those are people who are able to prescribe medication. And then the counseling or therapy part of it, there are many different professional groups that can provide that. So I'm a bit biased because I'm a psychologist and I think that we do good work, but all social workers, counselors, I think it's really important that you find somebody that you can connect with and feel like you can really talk openly to that person. And sometimes that may be individual therapy. There are times we're bringing in support partners, family therapists, seeing the whole family. I've had sessions just with children of people with MS or parents of people with MS. Sometimes I've had as many as 10 people in my office, and that is sort of a real, it's like a family reunion, but not necessarily in the most positive way. But it gives people an opportunity to practice talking to each other. And again, exercise added in there is very, very useful. So here are just some additional resources for managing mood. And some of these are webinars, programs through Can-Do, through the navigators. As we said, they're incredibly helpful to people all over the country. Doesn't matter where you live and where they're physically located, they can be helpful in locating resources for you. Mental Health America is a great resource because you can go online and you can respond to questions and items and see if you have elevated scores for depression or anxiety. And these are measures that are confidential, and you can print them off and take them into your provider. It also gives you a better sense of what are all the kinds of symptoms that might be related to something like depression. And identifying a therapist, this is one of the things that over the years we've heard a lot about, that it's very difficult sometimes to find a therapist or a counselor who knows anything about MS. So you end up feeling like you're educating them. But I think the society can be helpful. Also, this website, you can find online therapist finder to assist you in finding somebody that could provide mental health. Also, my experience is that they may not have to be an expert on MS, but if they have some experience working with other people who have chronic health conditions, that can be incredibly useful. And most therapists are really very open to learning more about MS. So now we're switching over to cognition. So again, those arrows pointing in all those directions. So a person who is experiencing cognitive changes may feel more anxious and discouraged about daily activity. So again, that issue of one symptom sort of exacerbating or increasing other of these invisible symptoms. So here's a polling question for you. Which of the following statements is not true? Cognitive changes in people with MS, A, are unrelated to level of physical disability. Is that untrue? Okay. How about B, that these cognitive changes are a primary cause of early departure from the workforce? So somebody thinks that's untrue. C, they usually progress rapidly once they occur. Remember, we're looking for the one that's not true. Do people think this is the one that's not true? Few hands. How about respond well to the use of compensatory strategies, such as better organization and routines? Untrue? My guess is you think that that's true. Okay, so the audience here was correct that once cognitive changes occur, they usually progress. That what is untrue is they do not progress rapidly once they occur. They tend to progress quite slowly. So what do we know about cognitive changes? We know that 65% of people with MS will experience some cognitive changes. These tend to be unrelated to the level of physical disability and generally progress slowly, as we just said. Cognitive changes are really important because they can alter communication, they can interfere with your activities at home and at work, they impact other people's perceptions of you and your own perception of yourself, and they affect the balance in partnerships. So this is one of those symptoms that often ends up resulting in people giving up roles and responsibilities within the family or within the workplace, other people taking on something that you used to do. Again, that word balance. So what else do we know about cognitive changes? They tend to threaten a person's sense of self, self-esteem, and self-confidence. So, who wants to think of themselves as having these cognitive difficulties? It's really hard. They become a primary cause of early departure from the workforce. So again, if you feel like you're having these issues, it's important to speak up. They actually are best managed with cognitive rehabilitation, compensatory strategies like organization, and exercise. So again, exercise keeps coming up here, so it's good for everything, just like sleep. And these changes may benefit from early and ongoing treatment with disease-modifying medications. So what are the areas or functions that are most commonly affected? Speed of information processing. So it's sort of like why sometimes in a crowded room where there are lots of people talking or in the course of a conversation, people have difficulty keeping up because everybody else is going at 60 miles an hour and you're going at 25. Memory, and it tends to be memory, more recent memory, sort of things, here and now and in the recent past. Also attention and concentration tend to be affected, so people are more easily distracted, more difficulty maintaining focus. Executive functions, these are things like decision making, tend to be affected. Visual spatial organization, so we need visual spatial skills to drive a car, park a car, wrap a present, find things in the refrigerator, that sort of thing. And it's not a visual problem, it's how your brain is processing the information. Verbal fluency, that tip of the tongue, having difficulty coming up with the word that you want to say, those are the things that tend to be affected. So that means that there are other functions that are not affected. So things like your general intellectual functioning, so your IQ, also remote or long-term memory tend not to be affected. So what you can do, you can take a look at how cognitive impairment might be affecting your daily life. Okay? You can also ask people that you trust, who know you well and interact with you on a regular basis, who you can count on to give you real good feedback, to ask them, have you noticed anything about my memory, anything about my ability to concentrate? Talk to your doctor about cognitive screening. So sometimes there are shorter versions of assessments that can be done. It doesn't mean spending a whole day having testing, but something that's much more brief to at least give you a sense of if what you're perceiving is probably cognitive difficulties, and then you could decide whether to go on to more assessment. You want to give yourself permission to do things a little differently than you did in the past. So if you now need to write things down to remember them, that's probably what more people should be doing, because even people without MS are really not as good at multifunctioning as they think they are, okay, multitasking. Okay, and compensation is key. So many memory problems that people are experiencing can be resolved with better organization, using a memory notebook, writing things down, keeping a calendar, organizing your work area better, writing things down as soon as you think about them. As soon as you tell somebody you're going to call them on Friday, write it down. Don't think you're going to remember even a few minutes from now. Routines and consistency are absolutely essential in helping to reduce the impact of cognitive difficulties. So keeping things in the same place, having rituals for how you get out of the house in the morning, before you go to bed at night, what you do, always putting your keys and your wallet and your glasses and your rings or whatever it is in the same place. And although your abilities may not improve overall, your ability to function will definitely be enhanced if you're open to using these strategies. And you want to keep your mind active and stimulated. That's really useful. That's part of the cognitive rehab. So here are some additional resources for managing cognitive changes. So there's a journal article here about recommendations for cognitive screening, so you have some idea about what might be involved in that. A webinar that's through Can Do on cognition, research, and strategies, and also another webinar that think of your mind as a muscle, the relationship between exercise and cognition. And there are actually many great webinars on our Can Do site there. So, and again, remember this what may, again, feel like a complicated diagram, but the fact that all of these arrows move in different directions, you can make a change at any point here, and it will make a difference in at least one of these symptoms, probably, and maybe more than one. And remember, you're sort of you're the captain of this team, so to speak. And for people who like sports metaphors, and I like them myself, it's sort of like if you're the captain of the team and you are the primary person figuring out the plays that are going to help you be successful in this journey, you need to let all the players in on the plays. MS will not sit on the bench. Fatigue will not sit on the bench. Mood may not sit on the bench. It's certainly not going into the locker room. So the more informed you keep all of these symptoms and the more attention you pay in constructive ways, the greater impact that you will have for your your life with MS. So we can take questions at this point. Anybody have a question for me? Okay, while we're waiting to see if anybody does, I actually want to respond to your question. Someone in the audience here at the last talk brought up the issue of you have your own business, okay? And you work many, many hours. And you wanted to know, do we know if there's sort of a cutoff or a certain limitation of work hours that would help us not have MS progress? Is that correct? Okay. And I think that it's interesting, but several of us, as soon as you asked that question, came to the same conclusion, and that was that it's probably not literally the number of hours that somebody works. It is how much people like their job, if they're doing something that they truly enjoy. And the other thing is how much stress is generated by that. And so I think there are people who are might work 20 hours and be super stressed by that. So then that's going to have an impact on their general health, because we know that stress can affect all of these symptoms, as we had in that one of the first diagrams about secondary fatigue. So I think it has more to do with how you experience those hours. And also, if you have good support systems in place, if you have people working with you who can provide assistance, who you have confidence in are doing a good job for you and your business. So I don't know, and actually I asked Tracy this question during the break, about do we know anything about, is there a certain cutoff to work hours? And she did not indicate that we had any such information. So I think it's more about these other sort of the quality of the work and the quality of your experience and the stress that you experience.
Any other questions from our in-person audience? It's a big topic.
I'm surprised.
I'm surprised. So everyone's happy, not tired, and with it.
Everybody in a good mood,
yeah.
Sitting down.
We did get a couple questions from the virtual audience. Tamara asks, how does a scale for cognitive issues work? The one for physical disabilities is easy to determine, but cognitive, not so much.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think there is not a specific scale for cognitive impairment. I think that, we can certainly talk about things like mild, moderate, severe, those kind of categories, which probably if you ask multiple people, you would get a bit sort of not distinct. Not everybody would say, oh, we know that, if we give you this measure or this test, that it fits into one of those categories. But I think people who have expertise in assessing cognitive impairment could provide that information. But it is not like the EDSS scale or that sort of thing. That I know our desire is always to have it like a thermometer or a tape measure and say that once you reach this point, this is true. Because the other thing is that, somebody might be assessed and be described as having mild impairment, but in fact feel like it's having more of a moderate or a severe impact on their life or their ability to do their job. Because also, and I wanted to mention this, there is such a thing as cognitive fatigue, okay? And so it's that sort of feeling like you just can't think one more thought. You just can't make one more decision. You just can't look at one more email. And so this is real. And generally, what we recommend to people is that if you take a break from what you're doing, sort of step away and do something that is sort of more calming to the mind, it sort of refreshes you. It's why sometimes people talk about taking power naps, For physical fatigue, this is sort of a power break, sort of stepping away from, because sometimes if you just keep hammering at an issue cognitively, you actually become more fatigued. Whereas if you come back fresh, then you can read the same thing and it feels very different to you. And I think this is also goes back to what I recommended about sort of breaking things down into smaller steps and over maybe several days or different periods during the day, that you're apt to get a better product if you give yourself more time to do that.
Thanks, Peggy. Oh, we have a question from our in-person audience. All right, 1 second.
I haven't been diagnosed that long, but I've noticed since my diagnosis that with my cognitive issues especially, I start experiencing anxiety that I've never had before. And is that the cause of my cognitive issues, or does that relate to fatigue? Or because it's usually 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and I mean it's can get kind of severe where I just want to lock myself in the house.
Okay. All right, that's an interesting question. So the question was that from somebody who hasn't been diagnosed very long, but has noticed some cognitive changes, but also new anxiety, and that you tend to notice this particularly late afternoon. My guess is that if you asked most people with MS, what is the hardest time of the day for you, I would say middle to late afternoon is a tough time. And that's actually one of the reasons that we encourage people. Remember that pacing we were talking about? So if you have something that's going to be cognitively take more of your reserves, more of your cognitive energy, that you try to do that at times of the day when you are not fatigued. So I think that, some people have lifelong anxiety. It sounds like you're saying this is new. And I would encourage you to try doing cognitive things at different times of the day and see if that is of some relief to your anxiety, but also to think about if that time period is tough for you, to think about how you could rearrange your day perhaps, or what you could do in that late afternoon period, and maybe almost try to head it off. So at 2:30 or so, think, what could I do that would be calming, relaxing, and is not draining, to sort of get your energy back up? Sort of like, you plug in your cell phone. This is sort of like an opportunity to plug yourself in to get your energy level back up.
Any other questions? More in person?
So I have noticed, and I'm also pretty recently diagnosed, that if there's a really high stress situation at work or something happens, like my hands will go numb, or sometimes the top of my head feels funny, like just very weird symptoms. And I keep hearing this theme of exercise, but how much does stress really impact you? Or is that more just something you should work on for yourself? I mean, is stress something that really makes this worse?
I think, again, another great question. And stress, out of that whole diagram where we were looking at all the different factors that can affect or result in secondary fatigue, I think stress is one of the favorite topics of psychologists for sure, in part because there's so much we can do about it. When you describe having physical symptoms in a really stressful situation, keep in mind that that can also happen for people who don't have MS. So there are people, if you think about what a panic attack is, where people get so stressed, so anxious that they have difficulty breathing, or they have palpitations, or they have numbness in their extremities. So I think not only does stress impact you in the here and now, So potentially, whatever symptom you have that's related to your MS, it could make that worse. It sounds like if that's not a symptom that you experience with your MS, that's more the kind of symptom that any of us could have with stress. So I think that there have been a number of studies done looking at the impact and the role of stress in MS. And generally speaking, we think that chronic, everyday stressors that often occur within families, relationships, work, have more of an impact. And there has been some concern that that might even make people more vulnerable to having an exacerbation. So there is a role that stress actually plays in the disease process. But I would certainly encourage anybody who's experiencing stress like you're describing and experiencing physical symptoms with it. There is so much that can be done about that. There are so many stress-reducing strategies that could be useful. Meditation, deep breathing, but also to think about what are the primary sources of stress in your life and which ones could be potentially literally eliminated, which ones could be reduced. But I think how you deal with stress is something that's potentially under your control. And you can learn new ways of coping that would be not just helpful to your MS, but helpful to you overall as a person. So I would do both. I would be concerned about it as it's affecting your MS, but I would also then do something about it for your general well-being.
Okay, a question from our virtual audience from Emily. She asks, it's an insurance question. Does insurance usually cover psychotherapy? And if not, will medications alone work?
Again, another good question about insurance. You know, I've been around for long enough that in the beginning, we had great difficulty getting insurance to cover mental health services. And people ended up, if they came at all, were having to pay out of pocket, which means lots of people weren't getting the services that they need. I think that now there really is parity. So that was one of the things that people in our government, sometimes the government actually does things that are helpful to us. And now insurance companies are required to cover mental health services. And so when I was at the University of Cincinnati, we would check out everybody's insurance on their behalf ahead of time to find out was there a limit to the number of sessions or that sort of thing. But many people had no clue that they had mental health benefits through their insurance. And in fact, lots of our physicians, our neurologists, were making the assumption that mental health services were not covered. But it's good to know what you're covered for. The other thing is that we have certainly benefited over the years from a counseling program. And I don't know, Christina, if this is still happening, where we could apply to a program for some counseling sessions to be subsidized or paid for by the National MS Society. And again, these are resources available to people that they don't know about.
We have a question from one of our speakers, Megan Byer.
Not a question. I just wanted to add, if that's okay, that sometimes the way that your provider bills can also be helpful. So if they use a health and behavior code, it can be billed under your medical insurance rather than your mental health benefits. And there's not a limit like there is for mental health benefits.
I'm glad you brought that up. And this has actually been a real something that psychology fought for, is to have these codes. And this is really all about helping people cope more effectively with a physical illness. So it doesn't necessarily give people a psychiatric diagnosis. And that's been incredibly helpful for those of us who provide the services. Thanks for mentioning that, Megan.
All right, one last question from our in-person participant here. If you could just...
Okay, sorry, I'm kind of nervous talking. But I'm recently diagnosed, kind of been dealing with this for almost 3 years with different doctors, where they see it on my brain. They see the lesions on my brain. I had another flare-up in January. but they don't see it on my spine or anywhere. So I'm fighting with that. But also I have, like, when you were talking about fatigue, I came a little bit late, but I understand, like, some mornings I can wake up feeling like $1,000,000, and then 10 seconds later, it's like this invisible wall that I seem to run into, and I turn into 25 cent. Just like I hurt from, mid-thigh down where it hurts to walk. I'm a licensed hairstylist. I literally had to let everything go. Even if I try to do hair, I've had over, I had so many mini strokes and seizures. Plus, I'm diabetic as well. And I'm just wondering, is this a normal thing? Because I'm in the process of looking for a new neurologist, because everybody else sees it. My primary doctor sees it, and all the symptoms that I'm having, like, I say it's like MS brain, because I can be in the middle of a sentence, and next thing you know, my mind just takes a vacation. And it's like, what was I talking about? And like, I would just kind of blank out, and it's like, what is this? What is happening to me? I'm too young for this. Like, what is going on? And I just want to know, is this a normal thing? Because it's so frustrating. I went through a period of calling Operation Save My Legs. I love to roller skate. I was like, y'all are going to die. Y'all going to put me in a casket with my roller skates on. I just got to figure out what is causing this tiredness. Like, I've lost 200 pounds on my own. I'm literally trying to do everything, researching MS for the last 3-4 years, and I'm just baffled. And I'm just wondering, is this a normal thing? Because I'm really, ready for them to solidify the diagnosis, because I can't, it's like it's stopping my life.
Well, I think that trying to go through the diagnostic process with assessments and tests and seeing various providers, honestly, I think was more part of MS years. When I first started out in MS, which was over 25 years ago, I think people struggled more to get the diagnosis. I think now with the quality of MRIs and other testing that can be done, and this may be a better question for Tracy as well, but I think that people who are concerned about the possibility of MS, being able to have an evaluation with a neurologist who specializes in MS, so is really an expert and likely to be able to put this puzzle together with you. And I'm not aware of what conclusion people have come to on your behalf, but I think that I can appreciate that from a mental health perspective, it's very confusing to be in what I would call what you're experiencing as diagnostic limbo.
It's like 3 different neurologists can say the same thing. They'll double check. I mean, everything. So even my primary care doctor sees it. Everybody. And so it's just like, I feel like by now, either they're playing with me or they're just giving me the runaround, because I'm not stupid. Medicine was my second love. I just went back to hair.
Well, I can certainly hear the frustration in your voice, and I think any of us would feel frustrated as well. And I think one of the primary difficulties with not getting a clear diagnosis is it leaves you up in the air about what to do or what kind of treatment you should be receiving. But this is one I would love to run by Tracy. I think, okay. All right, I think we certainly appreciate what you're experiencing and wish that were not the case for you, and we can run this by Tracy. But thank you, everyone, and great questions.